A hook to cry. My stepmother stole my childhood. Until the truth finally set me free. Teach de my chidio hod. The day my stepmother was led out of the courthouse in handcuffs, she stopped just long enough to look at me. Her eyes were cold, but this time they weren't full of confidence, they were full of fear. She leaned toward me and whispered, "Some secrets should have stayed buried." Then the deputy guided her through the courthouse doors, and she disappeared forever from my life. People often ask me if that was the moment I finally felt victorious. The truth is it wasn't. Standing there, I didn't feel happiness, I didn't feel revenge. I felt relief. 20 years of pain, confusion, and unanswered questions had finally come to an end. But to understand why that day mattered so much, you have to go back to where everything began. Back to when I was 12 years old. Back to when I still believed every adult was honest. I grew up in a quiet town in Ohio. Life wasn't exciting, but it was peaceful. Our neighborhood was the kind where everyone knew each other's names. Kids rode bicycles until sunset, neighbors waved from their front porches, and Friday night football games brought the entire town together. My father worked as a truck driver. He was gone most weekdays, delivering supplies across different states. His job was hard, but he never came home. He always brought me something small. Sometimes it was a candy bar. Sometimes it was a keychain from another state. Sometimes it was simply a hug that lasted longer than usual. My mother always laughed and said he spoiled me. Maybe he did, but she spoiled me too. She worked at our local library. Books were everywhere in our house. Every room had shelves filled with novels, history books, and children's stories. She believed every book could teach us something. When I couldn't sleep, she read to me. When I felt scared, she told me stories. When I failed at something, she reminded me that every hero fails before they succeed. She wasn't just my mother, she was my best friend. Looking back now, I realize those ordinary days were the happiest days of my life. Saturday mornings making pancakes together, walking our dog through the neighborhood, watching old movies while eating popcorn on rainy evenings. Nothing felt special back then. Now those memories are priceless. If I could relive one day from my childhood, it wouldn't be Christmas. It wouldn't be my birthday. It would simply be one normal day with my parents together. Because normal is something you never appreciate until it's gone. Everything changed on a cold November morning. I woke up because I heard something crash downstairs. At first, I thought the cat had knocked over a flower pot. Still half asleep, the moment I reached the doorway, my world stopped. My mother was lying on the floor. A broken coffee mug rested beside her. Coffee spread across the kitchen tiles. Her eyes were closed. She wasn't moving. I screamed. I ran toward her and shook her shoulder. Nothing. I grabbed the phone with shaking hands and called 911. I could barely answer the operator's questions because I was crying so hard. Within minutes, paramedics filled our house. Neighbors gathered outside. Someone called my father. I remember sitting on the front steps wrapped in a blanket while the ambulance drove away. I kept waiting for someone to tell me everything would be okay. Nobody did. At the hospital, time felt frozen. My father arrived looking terrified. We sat together in silence for what felt like hours. Neither of us wanted to imagine the worst. Then the doctor walked toward us. I knew the answer before he even spoke. My mother had suffered a massive brain aneurysm. There was nothing they could do. She was gone, just like that. One ordinary morning became the day my childhood ended. The weeks after the funeral passed like a dream I couldn't wake up from. People filled our house with flowers, food, and sympathy. Everyone kept saying the same thing. She's in a better place. You have to stay strong. Time heals everything. I know they meant well. But none of those words help. I didn't want comforting words, I wanted my mother. The house became painfully quiet. Her favorite chair stayed empty. Her books stayed on the shelves. Sometimes I walked into her bedroom just to smell her perfume one more time. I was terrified I would forget the sound of her voice. My father changed too. He stopped laughing. He stopped telling jokes. After work, he often sat alone in the living room staring at old family photographs. Sometimes I heard him crying after midnight. I never knew what to say. I was just a child trying to survive the same heartbreak. About 6 months later, my father told me he had met someone. Her name was Linda. At first, I didn't know how to feel. Part of me felt guilty. Meeting another woman somehow felt like replacing my mother. But another part of me wanted my father to smile again. When Linda came over for dinner, she seemed kind. She complimented my mother's cooking even though she had never tasted it. She listened when I talked. She laughed at my father's jokes. She even brought me a mystery novel because she heard I loved reading. It felt thoughtful. For the first time in months, our house didn't feel completely empty. Over the next few months, she helped decorate for Christmas. She baked cookies. She remembered birthdays. She always seemed cheerful. Everyone liked her. My grandparents liked her. Our neighbors liked her. Even I started believing she might help our family heal. Then one evening my father sat me down. He looked nervous. "Honey," he said softly, "Linda and I are getting married." I looked at his hopeful face. I knew he wanted my approval, so I smiled. "If she makes you happy, then I'm happy too." He hugged me tighter than he had in months. At that moment, I truly believed we were starting a new chapter. I believed happiness was finally returning. I couldn't have been more wrong. The first few weeks after the wedding were peaceful. Linda continued acting exactly as she had before. She asked about school. She smiled all the time. But then little things started changing. She began rearranging the house. She packed away many of my mother's photographs. She donated boxes of my mother's clothes without asking anyone. She even redecorated the living room because she said it was time to move on. Every change felt small, too small to argue about. But together they slowly erased the woman I loved most. One afternoon I came home from school and noticed something strange. My bedroom door was open. I knew I had closed it before leaving that morning. Inside, my desk drawers had been opened. My notebooks had been moved. Even my backpack had been searched. Linda stood in the hallway behind me. She smiled as if nothing was wrong. I was just cleaning, she said. Something deep inside me whispered that she was lying. I didn't know it then, but that was the first moment I realized the woman everyone called perfect was hiding a very different side. And before long I would discover just how dangerous that hidden side really was. The day I found my bedroom drawers open, I tried to convince myself it wasn't a big deal. Maybe Linda really had been cleaning. Maybe I was overthinking everything. After all, she had only been part of our family for a few weeks. I wanted to believe she was trying her best. But deep inside, something didn't feel right. Over the next few months, that uncomfortable feeling only grew stronger. At first, the changes were so small that they were easy to ignore. Linda started making new rules. Dinner had to be served exactly at 6. My homework had to be finished before I could watch television. My phone stayed on the kitchen counter every night. None of those rules sounded unreasonable. In fact, most people would probably agree with them. The problem wasn't the rules. The problem was that they only applied to me. If Linda made a mistake, she laughed it off. If my father forgot something, she smiled and said everyone has bad days. But if I made the smallest mistake, it became a long lecture. One afternoon, I forgot to take the trash to the curb. When my father came home, Linda met him at the door. I hate to complain, she said, but she refused to help around the house today. That wasn't true. I had cleaned the kitchen, vacuumed the living room, and folded 3 baskets of laundry. I had forgotten one thing, just one. But by the time Linda finished telling the story, it sounded like I had done nothing all day. My father looked disappointed. You need to help more, he said. I wanted to explain everything. But Linda spoke before I had the chance. It's okay, she said with a gentle smile. Teenagers make mistakes. She sounded kind, patient, understanding. My father smiled at her. Then try harder next time. That became our new normal. Every accomplishment I had somehow disappeared. Every mistake became a family discussion. When I earned an A on a science exam, Linda asked why it wasn't an A+. When I joined the school honor roll, she reminded my father that I forgot to wash the dishes the week before. Nothing I did was ever enough. The hardest part wasn't her criticism. It was watching everyone believe she was being helpful. Outside the house, she volunteered at church. She organized food drives. She baked cookies for neighbors. People constantly told me how lucky I was. You have such a wonderful stepmother. She's always smiling. She treats everyone with kindness. Every time I heard those words, I forced myself to smile. No one would have believed the truth, not back then. As time passed, Linda became more interested in my private life. She wanted to know where I went after school, who my friends were, what we talked about. She even asked to read my text messages. When I politely refused, she looked offended. I only want to protect you, she said. A week later, I came home early from school because one of my teachers had canceled class. As I walked into my bedroom, I froze. Linda was sitting on my bed. My diary was open in her hands. She looked up without any sign of embarrassment. Oh, she said calmly. You're home early. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. That's my diary. She slowly closed it. I know. Why were you reading it? She shrugged. There shouldn't be secrets in this family. I grabbed the diary from her hands. You had no right. For the first time since she joined our family, her smile disappeared. Her face became completely expressionless. The silence between us felt heavy. Then, just as quickly, the smile returned. If that's how you feel, she said softly. That evening, my father called me into the living room. Linda sat beside him. She looked upset. My father folded his arms. Linda says you've been Ruth of them. What? She said you yelled at her for trying to clean your room. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She wasn't cleaning. Then what was she doing? My father asked. As she was reading my diary, Linda lowered her eyes. I only opened it because I thought it was a school notebook. It was such an obvious lie. My diary had flowers on the cover. The worry was written in large gold letters. There was no way anyone could mistake it for homework, but my father believed her. He sighed. I think you owe Linda an apology. I felt my chest tighten. An apology. I was the one whose privacy had been violated. Yet somehow I had become the problem. I apologized because arguing only made things worse. That night I cried myself to sleep. Not because of the diary. Because I realized I was fighting a battle I couldn't win. Every conversation ended the same way. Linda looked calm. I looked emotional. She sounded reasonable. I sounded defensive. She knew exactly how to tell a story that made her look innocent. Months passed. I spent more time at school than at home. The library became my safe place. Sometimes I stayed there until it closed just so I wouldn't have to go home. One Friday evening, I came home later than usual. The house was quiet. I assumed everyone had gone to bed. As I walked toward my room, I heard voices downstairs. Linda was in the kitchen. She was talking on the phone. Normally, I would have kept walking. But then I heard something that stopped me in my tracks. She quietly said my mother's name. I froze. For years, Linda avoided talking about my mother. Whenever I mentioned her, she changed the subject. She packed away her photographs. She donated her clothes. She acted as though my mother had never existed. I moved closer to the staircase. Linda lowered her voice even more. No, she said. She doesn't know anything. A few seconds passed. The documents are still safe. Another pause. Her father has never asked questions. I felt a chill run through my body. What documents? What was she talking about? Then she spoke the words that changed my life forever. As long as nobody connects it back to her mother. Eva, my heart started racing. I stepped back before she could hear me. I quietly returned to my room and closed the door. That night I didn't sleep. I kept replaying her words over and over. My mother's name. Hidden documents. Secrets. Whatever Linda was hiding. It had something to do with my mother. And for the first time I decided I wasn't going to stay silent anymore. The next morning I made a promise to myself. No matter how long it took, I was going to uncover the truth the morning of Linda's phone call. I acted as if nothing had happened. I sat at the breakfast table. I ate my cereal. I wished my father a good day before he left for work. I even smiled at Linda. Inside, though my mind was racing, I couldn't stop thinking about what I had heard. She doesn't know anything. The documents are still safe. As long as nobody connects it back to her mother. Those words didn't sound like an ordinary conversation. They sounded like someone protecting a secret, and somehow that secret involved my mother. For years I had accepted that life wasn't fair. I had accepted that my father would probably never understand what was happening inside our home. But this felt different. This wasn't about hurt feelings anymore. This was about the truth, and I was determined to find it. A few days later, I got my first opportunity. Linda went shopping, and my father was on a delivery route that would keep him away until late that evening. For the first time in months, I had the house to myself. I didn't waste a second. I walked straight into my father's home office. The room smelled like old paper and coffee. My father kept everything organized. Bills were stacked neatly. Tax records were filed in labeled folders. There were shelves filled with binders dating back years. I started looking through them carefully. I wasn't trying to steal anything. For nearly an hour, I found nothing unusual. Then I noticed a small gray file box on the top shelf of the closet. It had no label, no lock. Just a plain cardboard box covered with dust. Inside were dozens of legal papers. Property records, insurance documents, bank statements. Most of them didn't mean much to me. Then one document caught my attention. Across the top, it read Property Transfer Agreement. My eyes immediately moved to the signature at the bottom. It was my mother's name. I stared at it for several seconds. Something felt strange. The signature looked like hers, but it also didn't. I couldn't explain why. It simply felt different, as if someone had copied it instead of writing it naturally. I carefully took a picture of the document with my phone before putting everything back exactly where I found it. If Linda noticed someone had searched the box, she would know I was investigating. I couldn't let that happen. Not yet. That weekend I visited my grandmother. She had been lonely since my mother passed away, and I tried to see her whenever I could. We spent the afternoon looking through old family photo albums. She smiled while telling stories about my mother's childhood. For the first time in a long while, I felt close to my mom again. As we turned another page, an old photograph slipped onto the floor. I picked it up. It showed my mother standing beside a small white farmhouse surrounded by trees. She looked happy, peaceful. I had never seen the place before. Grandma, I asked, where was this taken? She looked at the picture and smiled. That's your grandfather's old property? I frowned. I've never heard anyone talk about it. Her smile slowly faded. Your mother loved that place. I turned the photo over. Written in my mother's handwriting were 6 simple words. Someday this will be yours. I felt goosebumps. Those words weren't written for anyone else. They were written for me. I showed the picture to my grandmother. She nodded. Your mother always dreamed of fixing up that farmhouse and giving it to you one day. My heart skipped a beat. If that's true, what happened to it? She looked confused. I always wondered the same thing. That answer stayed with me all the way home. If my mother wanted me to inherit the property, why had it disappeared? The following Saturday I took a bus downtown. My destination was the county courthouse. I had never been inside before. The building felt enormous. People hurried through the halls carrying stacks of papers. Everything seemed serious, official. I walked into the public records office and nervously explained that I wanted to research family property records. The clerk showed me how to search the public database. For nearly 2 hours, I searched every record connected to my mother's name. I found it. The farmhouse. The same property from the photograph. The records confirmed it once belonged to my mother. But what happened afterward made no sense. Only a few weeks after her death, ownership had changed. Then it changed again. Then again, several transfers had taken place within a very short period. It was unusually complicated, almost as if someone wanted to hide the trail. I printed copies of everything I could find. As I walked outside, I sat on a bench and looked through the pages. The dates bothered me. The signatures bothered me. Everything about the documents felt wrong. A few days later, I drove out to the old farmhouse. It was almost 40 minutes from town. The road became narrower as I drove farther into the countryside. Eventually, I saw it, the white farmhouse from the photograph. Only now it looked abandoned. The porch was falling apart. Tall grass covered the yard. Several windows were broken. It was beautiful. Standing there, I felt strangely connected to my mother. I imagined her running through the fields as a little girl. I imagined her dreaming about bringing me there someday. Then I heard a voice behind me. "You must be Sarah's daughter." I turned around. An elderly man stood beside the neighboring fence. "You knew my mother?" I asked. He smiled. "She was one of the kindest people I've ever met." We talked for nearly an hour. He told me stories I'd never heard before. Then he said something that made my heart race. "Your mother always said she'd never sell this land." I stared at him. "Never." He shook his head. "She wanted to pass it on to you." My stomach tightened. The property records claimed she had agreed to transfer ownership before she died. But according to someone who knew her well, she had no intention of selling it. Someone was lying. That night I spread every document across my bedroom floor: the courthouse retograph, the property transfer, everything. I compared my mother's signature from old birthday cards with the one on the legal papers. The more I looked, the more obvious it became. The signatures weren't identical. The legal signature looked forced, slow, carefully copied. I wasn't an expert, but my instincts told me something wasn't right. For the first time, I wondered if my mother's signature had been forged. The thought terrified me, because if someone had forged those papers, this wasn't just family drama anymore. This was something much bigger. As I carefully gathered the documents back into a folder, I heard footsteps outside my bedroom. Someone stopped at my door. It was Linda. When I opened the door, she smiled. The same perfect smile she always showed everyone else. Then she asked a question that made my blood run cold. "Have you been asking people about your mother's property?" At that moment I realized one thing. She knew I was getting closer, and she was starting to panic. The moment Linda asked about my mother's property, I knew I had two choices. I could lie, or I could let her know I wasn't afraid anymore. I looked straight into her eyes and forced a small smile. "I've just been learning more about Mom," I said. Linda studied my face for several seconds. She was trying to decide whether I knew anything. Finally, she smiled. "Sometimes the past is better left alone." Then she turned and walked away. The moment she disappeared down the hallway, I closed my bedroom door. My hands were shaking. That wasn't a normal conversation. It was a warning. Linda knew I was getting close to something she wanted hidden. Instead of scaring me, it pushed me to keep going. I had spent years believing I was powerless. Not anymore. Over the next month, my investigation became my second life. During the day, at night, I studied documents. Every receipt, every property record, every note I had collected went into a binder. I created a timeline. The more organized everything became, the more obvious the pattern was. My mother's property disappeared only weeks after her death. Money moved between several accounts. Some of those accounts were connected to people who had worked with Linda years earlier. Individually, each detail seemed small. Together, they told a story someone had worked very hard to hide. I decided it was time to ask for professional advice. I didn't tell my father. I didn't tell my friends. Instead, I made an appointment with a local attorney who specialized in property disputes. Walking into that office was one of the hardest things I had ever done. I kept wondering if he would laugh at me. After all, I was only a young woman carrying a folder full of papers and questions. But he didn't laugh. He spent nearly an hour reading every document. Occasionally he asked me a question. "When did you find this? Who gave you this photograph? Did anyone else know you were investigating?" Finally he closed the folder. "You've done a remarkable job," he said. My heart started racing. "So, am I wrong?" He slowly shook his head. "I can't say exactly what happened without a full investigation, but I can tell you this. There are enough inconsistencies here to justify asking much bigger questions." For the first time since my investigation began, another person believed me. I walked out of his office feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Over the following weeks, more pieces of the puzzle appeared. The attorney helped me request additional public records. I also spoke with several people who had known my mother before she passed away. Most remembered her as generous and honest, but one woman told me something I never expected. "I remember Linda." I looked up immediately. "You knew her?" She nodded. "Not well, but I saw her around town before she ever married your father." That wasn't supposed to be possible. According to my father, they met by chance months after my mother died. So how could she have been around before that? The woman continued. "I always thought they already knew each other." Every new answer created another question. One afternoon, while sorting through newspaper archives at the local library, I found an old community event photo. Dozens of people stood together outside the town hall. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Then I noticed a familiar face. Linda. She was standing near the back of the crowd, only a few feet away from my mother. I checked the date beneath the photograph. It had been taken almost 2 years before my father claimed they first met. I stared at the picture in disbelief. There was no mistake. Linda had known who my family was long before she entered our lives. The chance meeting my father always talked about suddenly didn't seem like chance at all. That evening I showed the photograph to my attorney. He looked at it carefully. Then he compared it with the timeline we had built. "This changes things," he said quietly. "How? It suggests your stepmother's story may not be accurate." May not be accurate. It was the lawyer's careful way of saying someone had lied. The investigation continued for another several weeks. Every document supported the same conclusion. The property, the financial transfers, the signatures, the old photographs, the witness statements. None of them proved everything by themselves, but together, they painted a picture that was impossible to ignore. The attorney finally looked at me and said, "If you're ready, it's time to show your father." Those words terrified me. For years, my father had defended Linda. What if he refused to believe me again? What if this destroyed what little relationship we still had? The attorney gave me one piece of advice. Don't argue. Don't accuse. Simply let the evidence speak. A week later, my father invited the entire family to his birthday dinner. My aunt, my uncles, my cousins, even a few close family friends. As soon as I heard about the gathering, I knew this was my chance, not to embarrass Linda, not to seek revenge, but to finally tell the truth in front of everyone. For the next several days, I prepared, organized them in order: property records, financial reports, witness statements, photographs. Everything. The night before the party, I barely slept. I kept asking myself the same question. Would anyone finally believe me? The birthday dinner began like every other family gathering. People laughed. Children played in the backyard. Music filled the house. Linda moved through the crowd with her usual smile. She hugged relatives. She served food. She laughed at jokes. To everyone else, she looked like the perfect wife. But this time I wasn't watching the performance. I was waiting for the curtain to fall. After dinner, my father stood up to thank everyone for coming. When he finished speaking, I quietly stood. Every conversation stopped. My heart pounded so hard I thought everyone could hear it. I need a few minutes, I said. My father looked confused. Linda slowly turned toward me. For the first time in years, I saw uncertainty in her eyes. I placed a thick folder on the dining room table. I've spent months investigating something connected to Mom. The room became completely silent. No one spoke. No one moved. I opened the folder, and I said the words that would change our family forever. I think it's time. Everyone then became completely silent. Everyone stared at me. Some looked confused. Some looked worried. My father slowly put down his coffee cup. Linda stood perfectly still. For years, she had controlled every conversation in our family. She always knew exactly what to say, exactly how to smile, exactly how to make herself look like the victim. But this time was different. This time I wasn't speaking from emotion. I was speaking with evidence. I opened the first folder and placed several documents on the dining room table. I know this is difficult, I said, looking at my father, but please read these before saying anything. He nodded quietly. The first document showed the history of my mother's property. The second showed the unusual ownership transfers after her death. The third contained copies of signatures that looked different from my mother's genuine handwriting. Then I placed the old photograph of my mother beside the farmhouse on the table. On the back were the words she had written years earlier. Someday this will be yours. My father's hands began shaking as he read them. I've spent months trying to understand what happened, I continued. I talked to people who knew Mom. I searched public records. I asked questions no one had asked for years. One by one, I explained everything. The hidden property, the strange paperwork, the witness who remembered my mother saying she would never sell the land, the old photograph showing Linda at community events years before she supposedly met our family. Every piece fit together, not perfectly, but clearly enough to show that the story we had all believed was incomplete. My father looked at Linda. Is any of this true? She didn't answer. For the first time since she entered our lives, she seemed unable to find the right words. Finally, she spoke. You're misunderstanding everything. I remained calm. I thought so too. Then I handed my father another folder. Inside were statements from people who remembered seeing Linda around our family before she officially met him. He read every page without saying a word. The room remained silent. One of my uncles quietly asked, "Why would anyone lie about that?" No one answered because no one had an answer. Not even Linda. She tried to explain that people remembered things incorrectly. She claimed the documents had been misunderstood. She insisted there was another explanation. But every explanation raised even more questions. The confidence she always carried began disappearing. Everyone could see it. For years she had controlled the story. Now the facts were speaking for themselves. My father slowly closed the final folder. He looked at Linda with tears in his eyes. Those 3 words carried more pain than shouting ever could. Linda lowered her head. She didn't deny hurting me. She didn't apologize. She simply sat in silence. For the first time, everyone saw the woman I had been living with for years. Not the smiling neighbor. Not the caring volunteer. Not the perfect wife, just a person whose choices had broken a family. That night changed everything. Over the next several months, attorneys and investigators reviewed the documents. More records were examined. Old files were reopened. Witnesses confirmed details they had forgotten years earlier. Not every question received a perfect answer. Some mysteries never do. But enough evidence existed to correct property records and settle long-standing legal issues connected to my mother's estate. Part of what my mother intended to leave behind was finally restored. It wasn't about becoming wealthy. It wasn't even about the property itself. It was about knowing the truth. That mattered more than anything else. The hardest part came afterward. My father asked to meet me alone. We returned to the little diner where he used to take me for pancakes when I was a child. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Finally, he looked at me. "I'm sorry," his voice cracked. "I should have listened to you." The tears filled my eyes. Those were the words I had waited years to hear. Not because they erased the past, nothing could do that. But because they showed he finally understood. He understood why I had become so quiet. Why I stayed at school late. Why I seemed so distant. He realized I hadn't been trying to cause problems. I had been asking for help. "I'm sorry I wasn't there when you needed me," he said. I reached across the table and held his hand. "We can't change the past," he nodded, "but we can change what comes next." For the first time in many years, I felt like I had my father back. Months later, I drove to the old farmhouse alone. The afternoon sun stretched across the fields. The wind gently moved through the trees. The house still needed repairs. The porch leaned slightly, paint peeled from the walls. But none of that mattered. I walked slowly across the property until I reached the exact place where my mother had stood in the old photograph. I held the picture in my hands. Then I turned it over once more. Someday this will be yours. When I was younger, I thought she meant the land. Standing there, I realized she meant something much bigger. She meant strength, hope, integrity, the courage to stand for the truth, even when no one believes you. Those things could never be stolen, no matter how hard someone tried. Linda had taken many things from me. She had taken years of peace. She had taken trust. She had taken memories I could never replace. But she had never taken the values my mother gave me. Kindness, honesty, perseverance, those remained mine always. Life slowly moved forward. My father and I rebuilt our relationship one conversation at a time. Some scars never completely disappear, but scars remind us that healing is possible. People often ask if I hate my stepmother. The answer surprises them. No. Hatred would only keep me trapped in the past. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean pretending nothing happened. It simply means refusing to let someone else's choices control the rest of your life. The greatest victory wasn't exposing the truth. The greatest victory was finding peace after so many years. Today, when I think about my mother, I don't remember the hospital. I don't remember the funeral. I remember Saturday mornings making pancakes. I remember reading books together. I remember her laugh filling our little house. Those memories belong to me. No one can erase them. No one can rewrite them. And no one can ever take them away. Sometimes people spend years hiding the truth, believing it will never catch up with them. But the truth is patient, it doesn't rush, it waits. And when the time is right, it quietly steps into the light. As I left the farmhouse that evening, I looked back one final time. The setting sun covered the fields in a warm golden light. For the first time since I was 12 years old, I felt completely free. My stepmother had spent years trying to take away my future. In the end, the truth gave me something far more valuable. Take Yowu.